The moving truck pulled away from my driveway, taking with it the last of my belongings after 50 years in the house I built with my own hands. My son Daniel stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching me load my suitcase into my old Toyota. "Maybe now you'll finally understand that actions have consequences," he called out, his voice cold as winter steel. I turned to face him one last time, my heart breaking, but my resolve stronger than ever. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I replied, pulling out my phone to show him the real estate listing. "That's why I just sold this house to your ex-wife Rebecca for half its market value. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." My name is Patricia Holloway, and at 72 years old, I never imagined I'd be starting over completely. The house behind me wasn't just brick and mortar. It was 5 decades of memories, dreams, and sacrifices. I'd raised Daniel there as a single mother after his father abandoned us when the boy was barely 3. I'd worked double shifts at the textile factory, came home exhausted, and still found energy to help with homework, attend every school play, and cheer from the sidelines at his baseball games. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very son I'd given everything for had just thrown me out like yesterday's garbage. But as I drove away from Maple Street for the final time, I couldn't help but smile. Daniel had no idea what he'd just set in motion. He'd spent so many years taking me for granted, treating me like an inconvenience in his perfect suburban life, that he'd forgotten who he was dealing with. I wasn't just some helpless old woman. I was Patricia Holloway, the woman who'd single-handedly built a construction empire while raising a child. The trouble had been brewing for months, ever since Daniel's second wife Veronica moved in. She was 35 to his 48, blonde, perfectly manicured, and had opinions about everything, especially about how my presence in their house was cramping their style. Never mind that it was my house, bought and paid for with my own sweat and determination. Never mind that I'd graciously moved into the small guest room when Daniel asked if he could bring his new family to live with me after his divorce. Veronica had made it clear from day one that she considered me an unwelcome third wheel. The passive-aggressive comments started immediately. "Patricia, wouldn't you be more comfortable in one of those lovely senior communities? They have such wonderful activities." Or my personal favorite, "I just think it's important for newlyweds to have their space, don't you think?" Each suggestion delivered with a saccharine smile that never reached her calculating blue eyes. But it was her treatment of Daniel's children from his first marriage that really showed me who she was. Lily, 15, and Marcus, 12, were good kids who'd been through enough trauma with their parents, messy divorce. They needed stability, not another upheaval. Yet Veronica made it abundantly clear that they weren't welcome in what she now considered her domain. The kids' weekend visits became tense affairs, with Veronica making snide comments about their manners, their clothes, their very existence. I'd bitten my tongue for months, watching my son transform into someone I barely recognized. The Daniel I'd raised was kind, thoughtful, protective of those he loved. This new version prioritized keeping his young wife happy over everything else, including his own children, and the mother who'd sacrificed everything for him. When Lily came to me in tears after Veronica told her she was too old to be playing with toys, and threw away her beloved stuffed elephant, I knew something had to change. The final confrontation happened on a Tuesday evening in March. I'd been living in the guest room for 8 months, trying my best to stay out of their way while still maintaining some connection to my family. Veronica had been dropping increasingly obvious hints about wanting me gone, but I'd held my ground. After all, it was my house, and I'd been generous enough to let them live there rent-free while they got back on their feet financially. That evening, I was in the kitchen making dinner for Lily and Marcus, who were staying with us for spring break. Their mother, Rebecca, was traveling for work, and despite Veronica's protests, I'd insisted the children were welcome in my home. I was stirring a pot of homemade spaghetti sauce when Veronica stormed in, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous, Patricia. I can't live like this anymore. This is supposed to be my home, and I feel like a guest in my own house." Her voice was shrill, carrying through the entire first floor. Daniel appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing to defend me. "I'm just making dinner for the children," I said calmly. not turning around from the stove. They need to eat. That's exactly the problem. You act like you're in charge here, like this is still your house. But Daniel and I are married now, and I should be the woman of this house. Veronica's hands were on her hips, her designer dress perfect despite her obvious agitation. I finally turned to face her, wooden spoon still in hand. Veronica, this is my house. I've been more than accommodating, but I won't be made to feel unwelcome in my own home. Your house? She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You gave up any claim to being in charge when you decided to become a dependent. Daniel supports you now, not the other way around. The statement was so absurd I almost laughed. Daniel had been unemployed for 6 months and living off the savings I'd accumulated over 50 years of hard work. I'd been paying for groceries, utilities, and even Veronica's shopping trips without complaint. But I'd kept quiet about my financial situation, wanting to let Daniel maintain his dignity as the man of the house. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I began, but Veronica cut me off. The only misunderstanding is thinking that this arrangement could work long-term. Daniel, tell your mother that it's time for her to move out. We need our space, and frankly, I'm tired of tiptoeing around her feelings. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to remind his wife that she was talking about throwing out the woman who'd raised him alone and given him everything. Instead, Daniel cleared his throat and looked at the floor. Mom, maybe Veronica has a point. Maybe it would be better for everyone if you found your own place. We could help you look for a nice apartment, somewhere closer to town where you'd have more to do. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, my own son was choosing his wife's comfort over my well-being. I set down the wooden spoon and turned off the burner, my hands remarkably steady despite the storm raging inside me. I see, I said quietly. And how exactly do you propose I afford this apartment on my Social Security? Veronica jumped in before Daniel could answer. There are programs for people in your situation. Senior housing. Subsidized apartments. You'll figure it out. Programs for people in my situation. As if I were some charity case instead of the woman who'd built the very roof over their heads. I looked around the kitchen I'd designed myself. At the granite countertops I'd saved for months to afford. At the custom cabinets I'd had installed as a gift to myself after my business really took off. When do you want me gone? I asked, my voice steady. Daniel finally looked up, and I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. Maybe by the end of the month? That gives you a few weeks to find something. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to find somewhere to live after 50 years in the home I'd built. 3 weeks after a lifetime of putting his needs before my own. I nodded slowly, already formulating a plan that would teach both of them exactly who they'd decided to discard. Very well. I'll be out by the 31st. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched Daniel and Veronica make plans for their house, with the casual cruelty of people who'd never worked for anything in their lives. Veronica.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Talked about redecorating the guest room as her home office. About finally having space for the baby grand piano she'd always wanted. Daniel nodded along, occasionally shooting guilty glances in my direction but never once reconsidering their decision. I spent those weeks quietly making arrangements, reaching out to old contacts, and preparing for the most satisfying revenge of my 72 years. The beautiful thing about being underestimated is that people stop paying attention to what you're actually capable of accomplishing. The morning of March 31st arrived gray and drizzly, fitting weather for such a momentous day. I'd packed my personal belongings, clothes, photos, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother, into 2 suitcases and a small box. Everything else in the house, from the furniture to the kitchen appliances to the artwork on the walls, I was leaving behind. After all, they'd belonged to the house, and the house no longer belonged to me. Daniel had arranged for a moving company, though I'd told him I didn't need one. He seemed surprised by how little I was taking, but I explained that I was downsizing dramatically and wouldn't have room for much in my new living situation. This was technically true, though not in the way he imagined. Veronica had made herself scarce that morning, claiming she had a spa appointment and couldn't bear to watch me leave. I suspected she was simply afraid I might cause a scene, or, worse, try to talk Daniel out of their decision. She needn't have worried. I was more than ready to go. As the movers loaded my meager possessions into their truck, I handed Daniel an envelope containing what he assumed were the house keys. "Everything you need to know about the house is in there," I told him. "Congratulations on your new home." He hugged me awkwardly, and I could feel his relief that the difficult conversation was behind us. "Mom, I hope you understand this is for the best. You'll be happier having your independence, and Veronica and I need time to build our marriage." "I understand perfectly," I assured him, and I did. I understood that he'd chosen a woman who'd asked him to abandon his mother over the mother who'd never abandoned him. I understood that he valued his new wife's happiness more than the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to keep him fed and clothed. Most importantly, I understood that he had no idea what he'd just lost. The moving truck pulled away, and I walked to my Toyota parked at the curb. As I loaded my suitcase into the trunk, Daniel called out from the porch, "Do you have our new address? You know you're always welcome to visit." I turned to face him one final time, and that's when I delivered the news that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and showed him the real estate listing I'd posted the night before. "Actually, Daniel, I won't be visiting. I've sold the house." His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror. "What do you mean, sold the house? This is our house now." "No, it was my house. I built it, I paid for it, and my name was the only one on the deed. And as of this morning, I've sold it to Rebecca for exactly half of its market value." The color drained from Daniel's face as the implications hit him. Rebecca, his ex-wife, the mother of his children, now owned the house he'd just claimed as his own, the house where he'd planned to build his new life with Veronica. "You can't do that," he stammered. "We have a verbal agreement. We've been living here for months. As my guests," I corrected. "And now my hospitality has ended. Rebecca will be here this afternoon with the moving truck. I suggest you start packing." I climbed into my Toyota and started the engine, leaving Daniel standing in the driveway of a house that no longer belonged to him. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of him in my rearview mirror, frantically dialing his phone. Probably calling Veronica, probably calling Rebecca, probably trying to figure out how to undo what couldn't be undone. The drive to the Hilton downtown took only 20 minutes, but it felt like crossing into an entirely new life. I'd booked the penthouse suite for a month while I decided on my next move. After 50 years of living modestly, investing wisely, and building a construction empire that Daniel had never bothered to ask about, I was finally ready to enjoy the fruits of my labor. As I handed my keys to the valet and walked into the marble lobby, my phone buzzed with the first of what would be many frantic calls from my son. I glanced at the screen, smiled, and declined the call. He'd had 50 years to treat me with respect and appreciation. Now he could have a lifetime to regret throwing it all away. The penthouse suite was everything I'd dreamed of during those long years of working double shifts and sacrificing my own comfort for my family's benefit. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, the bathroom was larger than my old bedroom, and the living room could have housed a small army. I poured myself a glass of champagne from the complimentary bottle and settled into the plush sofa to watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. My phone continued to buzz insistently. Daniel had left 6 voicemails and sent a dozen text messages, each more desperate than the last. There were also 3 missed calls from Veronica, and, most satisfying of all, a text from Rebecca that simply read, "Thank you for the most generous gift I've ever received. The kids and I will take excellent care of the house." I smiled, remembering the conversation I'd had with Rebecca the week before. She'd been struggling financially since the divorce, working 2 jobs to support herself and the children, while Daniel contributed the bare minimum in child support. When I'd called to explain my plan, she'd been incredulous at first, then tearfully grateful. "Patricia, I can't accept something so valuable, it's too much." "Nonsense," I told her. "You've been a wonderful mother to those children, and they deserve stability. Besides, I can think of no better way to ensure that Daniel learns the consequences of his choices." Rebecca understood better than anyone what it felt like to be discarded by Daniel, when someone newer and shinier came along. She'd been a devoted wife for 15 years, supporting his career while raising their children, only to be replaced when he decided he wanted someone younger and more exciting. The parallel between her situation and mine wasn't lost on either of us. The irony was perfect. Daniel had thrown out his mother to make room for his new wife, only to discover that his ex-wife now owned the house he'd planned to share with his current wife. Veronica's dream of being the lady of the manor had evaporated in the span of a single conversation. As I sipped my champagne and watched the city lights begin to twinkle below, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. I'd started working at the textile factory when Daniel was 4, taking night shifts so I could be home during the day while he was in school. The work was hard, repetitive, and poorly paid, but it kept food on the table and a roof over our heads. When Daniel turned 10, I started taking business courses at the community college. I'd always been good with numbers and had a natural understanding of how buildings were constructed, probably inherited from my father, who'd been a carpenter before his death. The courses were challenging after long days at the factory, but I was determined to build something better for my son and myself. By the time Daniel was in high school, I'd saved enough to make a down payment on a small duplex that needed significant repairs. I spent weekends and evenings learning plumbing, electrical work, and basic construction, slowly transforming the property into something valuable. When I sold it 2 years later, the profit was enough to buy 2 more properties. Daniel had been proud of me then, bragging to his friends about his mom who could fix anything and was building a real estate empire. He'd helped with some of the lighter work, learning skills that would serve him well in his own life. I dreamed of us working together someday, maybe expanding into commercial construction or property development. But Daniel had different dreams. He wanted the prestige of a college degree and a white-collar career. I'd supported those dreams, even when it meant taking on additional debt to pay for his education at a prestigious university. When he graduated with a degree in marketing and landed a job at a downtown advertising firm, I'd been the proudest mother in the world. Somewhere along the way, though, Daniel had become embarrassed by his blue-collar roots. He stopped mentioning my business to his colleagues, stopped inviting me to company events, stopped acknowledging the sacrifices I'd made to give him the opportunities he'd enjoyed. When he married his first wife, Rebecca, a sweet teacher from a middle-class family, I'd hoped he'd rediscover his appreciation for honest work and genuine people. For a while, he had. Rebecca and I had gotten along beautifully, bonding over our shared love for Daniel and our excitement about becoming a family. When Lily was born, I'd been the first person Daniel called, his voice choked with emotion as he described his perfect daughter. Marcus had followed 3 years later, and I'd thrown myself into the role of grandmother with the same dedication I'd brought to everything else in my life. Those had been golden years. Sunday dinners at my house with 3 generations gathered around the table I'd built myself. Bedtime stories for the grandchildren, teaching them the same values of hard work and determination that I'd tried to instill in their father. Watching Daniel mature into a devoted husband and father, proud of the life he'd built with Rebecca. But success had changed him. As his career advanced and his salary increased, Daniel began to see his humble beginnings as obstacles to overcome, rather than foundations to build upon. He stopped visiting as frequently, stopped bringing the children around as often, stopped treating me like the woman who'd made his success possible. The divorce had been devastating for everyone involved. Daniel claimed he'd fallen out of love with Rebecca, that they'd grown apart, that he needed something different in his life. I suspected the truth was simpler and more painful. He'd met Veronica at a company party and decided he deserved someone who matched his new image of himself. Rebecca had been gracious throughout the proceedings, focusing on what was best for the children rather than trying to punish Daniel for his betrayal. She'd accepted the modest settlement he'd offered, keeping the house they'd shared while he moved into a downtown apartment. I'd watched my son abandon everything good in his life for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone to the lifestyle she wanted. When Daniel had asked if he could move in with me temporarily while he and Veronica figured things out, I'd agreed despite my reservations. I'd told myself it would be an opportunity to rebuild our relationship, to remind him of who he really was beneath the shallow ambition that had consumed him. Instead, I'd watched him become someone I barely recognized. The Daniel I'd raised would never have allowed anyone to disrespect his mother the way Veronica had. The Daniel I'd raised would have prioritized his children's emotional well-being over his new wife's comfort. The Daniel I'd raised would have remembered that his mother was the reason he'd had any opportunities at all. But that Daniel was gone, replaced by a stranger who valued appearances over authenticity, convenience over loyalty, and a young woman's approval over his own mother's welfare. The final insult had been his assumption that I was financially dependent on him, that I needed his support to survive. If he'd bothered to ask, he would have learned that I'd built Holloway Construction into one of the most successful small companies in the state. If he'd shown any interest in my life beyond what I could do for him, he would have known that I owned commercial properties throughout the city, that my investment portfolio was worth more than he'd earn in a lifetime, that the modest lifestyle I'd maintained was a choice rather than a necessity. But Daniel had never asked about my business, my finances, or my plans for the future. To him, I was simply his aging mother, someone to be managed and eventually disposed of when I became inconvenient. He'd made assumptions based on appearances and stereotypes, never bothering to look beneath the surface. The champagne was making me philosophical, and as the night deepened outside my penthouse windows, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of the day's events. I'd lost my son, perhaps permanently, but I'd gained something more valuable, my self-respect. For too many years, I'd accepted crumbs of affection from a man I'd given everything to. I'd made excuses for his neglect, rationalized his choices, and minimized my own worth to preserve a relationship that had become toxic. No more. At 72, I was finally free to live my life on my own terms. I had the resources to travel anywhere I wanted, to pursue interests I'd deferred for decades, to surround myself with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. My phone buzzed again, another call from Daniel. This time I answered. "Mom, thank God, where are you? We need to talk about this house situation. There has to be some kind of mistake." "There's no mistake, Daniel. I sold the house to Rebecca. She and the children will be moving in this afternoon. But where are we supposed to go? Veronica and I don't have anywhere else to live." The question revealed everything I needed to know about how he'd viewed our arrangement. In his mind, I'd been providing free housing while he spent his money on other things. He'd never considered that his comfortable lifestyle had been subsidized by my generosity. "I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're a resourceful man with a good education and excellent connections. Perhaps Veronica's family can help." "Mom, please. I know we handled this badly, but you can't punish us like this. Can't we work something out?" "Daniel, for 50 years, I worked things out. I worked out how to raise you alone after your father left. I worked out how to pay for your education while building my own business. I worked out how to maintain a relationship with you even when you were too busy to return my calls. But I'm done working things out for people who don't appreciate the effort. That's not fair. I always appreciated." "Did you? When was the last time you asked about my business? When was the last time you inquired about my health, my plans, my dreams? When was the last time you treated me like someone whose opinions and feelings mattered?" Silence on the other end of the line. "I thought so. Daniel, I love you. I always have, and I always will. But I won't be taken for granted anymore. You made a choice when you decided that keeping Veronica happy was more important than treating your mother with respect. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice." "Mom, wait." I hung up the phone and turned it off. Whatever Daniel wanted to say, I wasn't ready to hear it. Perhaps someday we'd be able to rebuild our relationship, but it would have to be on entirely different terms. He would have to earn back the love and respect he'd thrown away. The next morning, I woke up in the most comfortable bed I'd ever slept in, with sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the entire city. Room service delivered a breakfast that would have fed a family, and I ate it slowly while reading the financial news and planning my next moves. Rebecca had sent a text with photos of the children settling into their new home. Lily was arranging her stuffed animals on the built-in shelves in what had been my guest room, and Marcus was already setting up his video game system in the family room. They looked happy and secure in a way that warmed my heart. "The kids love having so much space," Rebecca had written. "Lily says she feels like a princess in a castle. I can never thank you enough for this gift." That afternoon, I drove to the house for one final visit. I wanted to see how Rebecca and the children were settling in, and I had a few belongings I'd forgotten in my haste to leave. But mostly, wanted to witness Daniel's reaction to his new reality. I found him standing in the driveway, staring at the moving truck that was carrying his possessions away from the house he'd thought would be his. Veronica was pacing nearby, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, and her designer clothes wrinkled from stress. When she saw me approaching, her face contorted with rage. "This is all your fault," she screamed, her voice carrying across the neighborhood. "You're a vindictive old woman who can't stand to see your son happy." I looked at this woman who'd demanded that I be thrown out of my own home, who'd treated my grandchildren like unwelcome strangers, who'd convinced my son to abandon the mother who'd sacrificed everything for him. She was young, beautiful, and utterly without character or depth. "Veronica, I'm sorry you're upset, but my son's happiness was never contingent on my misery. If Daniel had chosen a woman who appreciated family loyalty and treated his mother with respect, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You don't understand. We don't have anywhere to go. Daniel's apartment lease ended when we moved in with you. We spent our savings on the honeymoon and the new furniture. The furniture that was now being loaded into a truck, presumably headed for a storage unit since they had no home to put it in." I felt a moment of sympathy for their situation, but it passed quickly. They'd created this crisis through their own choices. Daniel approached us, his face haggard with stress and exhaustion. "Mom, please, I'm begging you. Can't we find some way to fix this? I'll do anything." "Anything?" I asked. "Would you publicly apologize for the way you've treated me? Would you acknowledge that your wife's behavior toward me was unacceptable? Would you prioritize your children's relationship with their grandmother over your new wife's comfort?" I watched him struggle with the questions, saw him glance at Veronica's furious face, witnessed the exact moment when he chose her feelings over doing what was right. "I think you're being unreasonable," he said finally. "Veronica was just trying to help us build our marriage. Moving out was the mature thing for you to do. And there it was." Even faced with homelessness, even after losing everything, Daniel couldn't bring himself to admit that he'd been wrong. He couldn't acknowledge that throwing out his elderly mother to appease his young wife had been cruel and short-sighted. "Then I think we have nothing more to discuss," I said calmly. "I hope you find somewhere comfortable to live." As I walked toward the house to collect my forgotten items, I heard Veronica shrieking at Daniel about calling lawyers, about suing me, about making me pay for what I'd done to them. I smiled, knowing that any legal challenge would only expose the full extent of my financial resources and Daniel's complete lack of claim to the property. Inside the house, I found Rebecca in the kitchen, unpacking boxes and arranging her belongings in the cabinets I'd designed. She looked up when I entered, her face glowing with happiness and gratitude. "Patricia, I still can't believe this is real. The children are so excited they can barely contain themselves." "They deserve stability," I said, looking around the room where I'd cooked thousands of meals, where I'd helped Daniel with homework, where I'd planned the business deals that had made all of this possible. "You all deserve better than what Daniel was offering." "He's outside, isn't he?" I saw the moving truck. "Yes, he and Veronica are relocating." Rebecca nodded, thoughtfully. "I feel bad for him in a way. He had everything. A wonderful mother, beautiful children, a home filled with love. And he threw it all away for someone who only cared about what he could give her." It was a generous assessment from a woman who had every right to be bitter about her ex-husband's choices. But Rebecca had always been the bigger person, focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on past hurts. "His loss is your gain," I said. "And more importantly, it's Lily and Marcus's gain. They need a stable home with a mother who puts their needs first. Speaking of which, they want to see you. They're up in what used to be your room, and Lily has been asking when Grandma Patricia is coming to visit." I climbed the stairs to the guest room, where I'd spent 8 months feeling like an unwelcome intruder in my own home. Now it was bright and cheerful, filled with Lily's artwork and Marcus's baseball trophies. The children ran to me as soon as I appeared in the doorway, wrapping their arms around me in the kind of enthusiastic embrace I hadn't received from their father in years. "Grandma Patricia, is it really true that you gave us this house?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "I gave it to your mother, sweetheart. But yes, this is your home now." But where will you live? Marcus wanted to know. I'm going to find a new place, somewhere exciting where I can have adventures. Can we visit you? Lily asked. Of course. Any time you want. As I hugged my grandchildren in the room where I'd felt so unwelcome just days before, I realized that I'd gained something precious in this exchange. I'd traded a son who'd taken me for granted for grandchildren who appreciated my love. A daughter-in-law who'd dismissed me for an ex-daughter-in-law who valued my presence. The mathematical equation was simple. I'd subtracted the people who'd made me feel small and added the people who made me feel valued. The sum was a life filled with genuine love rather than obligatory tolerance. When I left the house that afternoon, I didn't look back. Daniel and Veronica were gone, probably off to figure out their next move. The moving truck had disappeared, taking with it the remnants of a dream that had been built on other people's sacrifices. I drove back to the Hilton with a sense of closure I hadn't expected to feel. My phone had dozens of missed calls and text messages, but I ignored them all. I had more important things to do than manage other people's crises. That evening, I called my real estate agent and put in an offer on a penthouse condominium overlooking the harbor. It was expensive, luxurious, and completely impractical for a woman who'd spent 50 years living modestly. In other words, it was perfect. I also made reservations for a month-long trip to Europe, something I'd dreamed of doing since I was young but had never allowed myself to consider. After a lifetime of putting everyone else's needs first, I was finally ready to prioritize my own happiness. As I fell asleep in my suite that night, I thought about the phone calls I'd ignored from Daniel. Part of me wondered if he was starting to understand what he'd lost, if he was beginning to regret the choices that had led to this moment. But a larger part of me didn't care. I'd spent 7 decades caring more about other people's feelings than my own. I'd sacrificed my dreams, my comfort, and my dignity to make other people's lives easier. I'd accepted disrespect and neglect because I thought that was what mothers were supposed to do, but I was done being a martyr. At 72, I was finally ready to be the hero of my own story, to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what others expected from me. If Daniel wanted a relationship with me in the future, he would have to earn it by becoming the kind of man who deserved my love and respect. Until then, I had a new life to build, adventures to pursue, and dreams to fulfill. For the first time in decades, the future was entirely my own. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new penthouse as I signed the final papers for the waterfront condominium. My real estate agent, a sharp young woman named Sarah, slid the keys across the mahogany table with a smile that could have powered the entire building. Congratulations, Mrs. Holloway. You're now the proud owner of one of the most prestigious addresses in the city. She gestured toward the panoramic view of the harbor, where sailboats dotted the sparkling water like white butterflies. I have to say, in 20 years of selling luxury properties, I've never seen someone make such a decisive purchase. I tucked the keys into my purse, feeling their weight like a promise of freedom. When you've spent 72 years being practical, Sarah, there's something liberating about finally being impractical. The condominium was everything my modest guest room hadn't been. Spacious, elegant, and undeniably mine. 3 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, a gourmet kitchen that would make a professional chef weep with envy, and a living room large enough to host dinner parties for 20. The master suite alone was bigger than most people's entire apartments, with a walk-in closet that could house a small family and a bathroom featuring a soaking tub overlooking the harbor. But it was the 3rd bedroom that had sealed the deal for me. Large enough to serve as a proper guest room, with built-in bookshelves and a window seat that begged for lazy Sunday afternoons with a good novel. When Lily and Marcus came to visit, they would each have their own space, their own sanctuary, in what I was already thinking of as our shared refuge from the chaos their father had created. Moving day arrived with the efficiency of a military operation. I'd hired the same company that had moved Daniel and Veronica out of my old house, finding a certain poetic justice in the symmetry. The movers worked with professional precision, transforming my empty penthouse into a home within hours. I'd indulged myself at the furniture showrooms, choosing pieces based on comfort and beauty rather than practicality and price. A butter-soft leather sofa in rich burgundy, dining room chairs upholstered in cream silk, a four-poster bed that belonged in a European castle. Each purchase felt like a small rebellion against the decades I'd spent denying myself anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. The artwork came from local galleries, original pieces that spoke to me, rather than mass-produced prints chosen for their ability to match any decor. Abstract paintings in jewel tones, photographs of far-off places I intended to visit, sculptures that caught the light and threw interesting shadows across my walls. For the first time in my life, I was creating a space that reflected who I truly was rather than who I thought I should be. As the movers carried in the last of my new belongings, my phone rang. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with genuine pleasure. "Patricia, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to thank you again for the house, but also to tell you something that happened yesterday." "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" "Daniel came by. He was looking for you, actually. He seemed surprised that you weren't living here anymore." Rebecca's voice carried a note of amusement. "I think he assumed you'd just moved in with us." I laughed, imagining the expression on my son's face when he realized his mother wasn't simply changing bedrooms but had disappeared entirely from his sphere of influence. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you'd moved out and I had no idea where you'd gone. He asked me to give you a message if I heard from you." "And what message was that?" "He wants to talk. He says he's ready to apologize and work things out. He mentioned something about Veronica being willing to compromise." The offer hung in the air between us, and I considered it carefully. Part of me wanted to believe that Daniel had learned something from losing his home and being forced to face the consequences of his choices. But a larger part of me remembered the look on his face when I'd asked if he would publicly acknowledge his wife's disrespectful behavior toward me. "Rebecca, what do you think? Do you believe he's genuinely sorry, or is he sorry that his actions had consequences?" A long pause. "Honestly, I think he's panicking. He and Veronica are staying in a hotel, and from what I understand, their financial situation isn't great. I think he's realizing that burning bridges with the people who loved him wasn't the smartest strategy." It was the answer I'd expected, and it confirmed what my heart already knew. Daniel wasn't calling because he missed me or because he'd developed a sudden appreciation for everything I'd done for him. He was calling because he needed something from me, just as he always had. "Tell him I'm fine and that I'll contact him when I'm ready. But Rebecca, make it clear that any conversation we have will be on my terms, not his." "I will. Patricia, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy? Really, truly happy?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because no one had asked it in so long. When was the last time anyone had cared about my happiness, rather than my usefulness? You know what, Rebecca? I think I am. For the first time in decades, I'm exactly where I want to be. Doing exactly what I want to do. It's terrifying and exhilarating and completely wonderful. Good. You deserve that. You deserve all of it. After we hung up, I stood in my new living room surrounded by boxes and possibilities. Through the windows, I could see the harbor stretching toward the horizon, dotted with boats heading out to sea. Soon, I would be one of those travelers, setting sail for destinations I'd only dreamed of visiting. My European vacation was still 3 weeks away, but I'd already begun planning an itinerary that would have impressed a professional travel agent. Paris first, where I would visit every museum and cafe I'd read about in books. Then Rome, with its layers of history and art that had survived millennia. Barcelona, Vienna, Prague. Cities that existed in my imagination as collections of photographs and stories, soon to become memories of my own making. But first, I had a more immediate adventure to undertake. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reverie, and I opened it to find a delivery man holding an enormous bouquet of flowers. "Patricia Holloway? That's me. Special delivery from Benson's florist." The arrangement was spectacular. 24 white roses mixed with eucalyptus and baby's breath, elegant and expensive. I carried them to the kitchen and searched for the card, curious about who might be sending me flowers in my new home. The card was small and cream-colored, with a message written in careful script. Welcome to your new beginning. With love and gratitude, Lily and Marcus. My eyes filled with tears as I read the note again. Somehow, those children had managed to find my new address and send flowers to celebrate my fresh start. In a world where their father couldn't be bothered to show genuine interest in my well-being, my grandchildren had thought to mark this milestone with a gesture of love. I called Rebecca immediately, and when she answered, I could hear children's voices in the background. "Rebecca, did you help Lily and Marcus send me flowers?" "I may have provided transportation to the florist and assisted with the payment," she said with a laugh, "but the idea was entirely theirs. They wanted to do something special for your new home." "Can I talk to them?" "Of course! Kids, Grandma Patricia is on the phone." The phone was passed around, and suddenly I was listening to both children talking at once, their excitement bubbling over as they described their first week in their new home. "Grandma Patricia, my room is so big I can do cartwheels in it," Lily announced. "And Marcus set up his drums in the basement so he doesn't bother anyone." "The backyard has a swing set that the old owners left," Marcus added. "Mom says we can have a barbecue next weekend and invite you over." "I would love that, sweetheart. But first, I want to invite both of you to see my new place. Would you like to come for lunch this Saturday?" The enthusiasm in their voices was infectious, and we spent the next few minutes planning our first official gathering in my penthouse. They wanted to know if I had a pool. Sadly, no, but the building had a beautiful rooftop deck. If they could sleep over, absolutely. And if I would teach them how to make my famous chocolate chip cookies, definitely. As we talked, I realized that I was already building the kind of relationships I'd always wanted with my grandchildren. Relaxed, joyful, built on mutual affection rather than obligation. Without the tension of Daniel and Veronica's disapproval. Without the constant worry about stepping on someone's toes or overstepping invisible boundaries, I could simply be their grandmother. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking and arranging my new belongings. Each item found its place, as if it had been waiting its entire existence for this particular home. The leather-bound books I'd collected over the years filled the built-in shelves in my study. The china that had belonged to my mother finally had a dining room worthy of its elegance. The quilts I'd made during rare, quiet evenings were draped over reading chairs and guest room beds, adding warmth and color to rooms that had seemed impossibly sophisticated. That evening, I ordered dinner from the restaurant on the building's ground floor and ate it on my terrace while watching the sunset paint the harbor in shades of pink and gold. The salmon was perfectly cooked, the wine was crisp and cold, and the company, my own, was exactly what I needed. As darkness fell and the city lights began to twinkle like earthbound stars, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just 2 weeks. I'd gone from being an unwanted guest in my own home to being the mistress of a penthouse palace. More importantly, I'd gone from accepting whatever crumbs of affection my family was willing to offer to demanding the respect and love I deserved. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, but the content made it clear who was trying to reach me. "Mom, this is Daniel. Rebecca gave me your number. We really need to talk. Can you call me back?" I stared at the message for a long time, considering my options. I could continue to ignore him, letting him stew in the consequences of his choices indefinitely. I could call him back and listen to whatever apology or explanation he was prepared to offer. Or I could take a third option, respond on my own terms, in my own time, with my own agenda. I chose the third option, typing a response that was polite but firm. "Daniel, I received your message. I'm not ready to talk yet, but when I am, I'll let you know. In the meantime, I hope you and Veronica are settling into your new living arrangements." His response came back within minutes, a wall of text that revealed his desperation more clearly than any conversation could have. "Mom, please don't shut me out like this. I know we made mistakes, but we can fix this. Veronica understands now that we handled things badly. She wants to apologize to you personally. We've been staying in a hotel for 2 weeks and we can't afford it much longer. I've been thinking about everything you said, and you're right, I should have stood up for you. I should have appreciated everything you've done for me. Can't we find a way to work through this?" I read the message twice. analyzing every word choice and emotional appeal. Daniel was saying some of the right things, but the timing was suspect. He'd had 50 years to appreciate my sacrifices and stand up for me when it mattered. The fact that his newfound awareness coincided perfectly with his housing crisis suggested that his motivations were more practical than emotional. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I poured myself another glass of wine and continued enjoying my peaceful evening. If Daniel wanted to rebuild our relationship, he would have to do more than send desperate text messages from a hotel room. He would have to prove that he'd learned something meaningful from this experience, that he was capable of growth and genuine change. Saturday arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for my first official guests in the penthouse. I spent the morning preparing for Lily and Marcus's visit, making sure the refrigerator was stocked with their favorite snacks and the cookie ingredients were ready for our baking session. Rebecca arrived with the children at exactly noon, her eyes widening as she took in the elegant lobby with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. "Patricia, this place is incredible. It's like something from a magazine." The children were equally impressed, their voices echoing in the high-ceilinged elevator as we rode to the top floor. When the doors opened directly into my foyer, they stood speechless for a moment before exploding into excited chatter. "Grandma Patricia, you live in a castle?" Lily exclaimed, running to the windows to press her nose against the glass. "Look at the boats," Marcus added, pointing to the harbor spread out below us. "Can we go sailing sometime?" "We certainly can," I promised, making a mental note to research sailing charters. "But first, who's ready to make cookies?" The afternoon passed in a blur of flour, chocolate chips, and laughter. We made cookies, explored every room in the penthouse, and had an impromptu dance party in the living room. Rebecca relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since before her divorce, settling into one of my new armchairs with a cup of tea and a genuine smile. "The kids haven't been this carefree in months," she told me as we watched Lily and Marcus build a fort out of sofa cushions. "The house, this new stability, it's made such a difference in their lives. They're remarkable children. You've done an excellent job raising them, especially considering the challenges you faced." "I had help," she said meaningfully. "Even when Daniel was pulling away from his family, you were always there for the kids. Those Sunday dinners at your old house, the bedtime stories, the school plays you never missed. They remember all of it." As if summoned by our conversation, Lily appeared at my elbow with chocolate smudges on her cheek and a serious expression on her young face. "Grandma Patricia, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Are you mad at Daddy?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. I looked into my granddaughter's intelligent eyes and realized she deserved an honest answer, or at least as honest as I could make it appropriate for a 15-year-old. "I'm disappointed in some of the choices your father has made," I said carefully, "but I'm not mad at him. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions about the relationships in their lives." "He came to see us yesterday," she continued. "He seemed really sad. He asked if we'd heard from you. Marcus joined our conversation, abandoning his fort construction. He said he misses you and wants to fix things." I felt a familiar tug of maternal concern, the same instinct that had driven me to protect and provide for Daniel throughout his childhood. But I'd learned the hard way that protecting someone from the consequences of their actions wasn't really protection at all. It was enabling. "What do you think about that?" I asked the children, curious about their perspective on their father's situation. Lily considered the question with the seriousness of someone much older. "I think he should have thought about missing you before he made you leave. It's like when I was mean to Emma Rodriguez at school and then wanted to be friends again after I found out her dad worked for a movie studio." "That's a very wise observation," I said, impressed by her insight. "But he's still our dad," Marcus added with the loyalty that children maintain even when their parents disappoint them. "Maybe you could give him another chance?" Before I could respond, my phone rang. Rebecca glanced at the screen and her expression changed. "It's Daniel," she said quietly. I looked at the children, who were watching me with hopeful expressions, and made a decision that surprised even me. "I'll take it." I answered the phone and immediately heard the sounds of traffic and city noise in the background. "Mom, thank God you answered." I've been trying to reach you for days. I know. I've been busy settling into my new home. Your new home? Mom, where are you living? Rebecca wouldn't tell me, and I've been worried sick. There was something almost comical about Daniel worrying about my living situation while he was the one calling from what sounded like a street corner. But I kept my voice neutral. I'm fine, Daniel. I have a beautiful new place with plenty of room for the grandchildren to visit. Can I see you? Please? I know I messed up, but I want to make this right. I looked at Lily and Marcus, who were pretending not to listen, while hanging on every word. Their hopeful faces reminded me that whatever issues I had with their father, they loved him and wanted their family relationships to be healthy. I'll consider it, I said finally, but any conversation we have will be on my terms, Daniel. I won't be manipulated or guilted into accepting an apology that's motivated by convenience rather than genuine remorse. I understand. Whatever you want. Just please don't shut me out forever. After I hung up, the children looked at me with barely contained excitement. Does that mean you might forgive Daddy? Lily asked. It means I might listen to what he has to say. I corrected. Forgiveness is earned, sweetheart, not given automatically. The rest of the afternoon passed pleasantly, but the phone call had introduced a note of complexity into what had been a perfectly simple day. As Rebecca prepared to leave with the children, she pulled me aside for a private word. Thank you for taking his call. I know it wasn't easy. The children love their father. I won't punish them for his mistakes by refusing to even speak with him. What will you do if he calls again? I considered the question, weighing my desire for peace against my need for genuine respect and change. I'll give him one chance to prove he's learned something from this experience. But if he wastes it, if he tries to minimize what happened or shift the blame, then we're done permanently. That evening, as I cleaned up the remnants of our cookie-making session and straightened the cushions from the children's fort, I felt a sense of contentment I hadn't experienced in years. My home had been filled with laughter and love, the kind of natural joy that comes from relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection. But Daniel's call had reminded me that my new life couldn't exist in complete isolation from my old one. Like it or not, I would have to decide what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted to have with my son going forward. My phone buzzed with another text message, this one longer and more carefully composed than his previous attempts. Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking since we talked today. I know I can't undo the hurt I've caused, but I want you to know that I'm finally understanding what I lost when I chose Veronica's demands over your dignity. You gave me everything, your love, your sacrifice, your unwavering support, and I repaid you by treating you like an inconvenience. I was wrong. Veronica was wrong. And I'm ready to do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness. Would you be willing to meet me for coffee? Just the two of us. No agenda except giving me a chance to apologize properly. I love you, Mom. I always have, even when my actions suggested otherwise. I read the message 3 times, analyzing the tone and word choices. It was better than his previous attempts, more thoughtful, more specific about what he'd done wrong. But I'd heard pretty words from Daniel before, usually when he wanted something. Still, the children's hopeful faces lingered in my memory, and I remembered what it felt like to love someone despite their flaws. Perhaps everyone deserved one final chance to prove they were capable of growth and change. I typed a brief response. Coffee sounds reasonable. Tuesday at 10 a.m. Harborview Cafe. Come alone. His reply was immediate. Thank you. I won't waste this opportunity. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the strange turns my life had taken in recent weeks. I'd lost a son and gained a daughter-in-law. I'd given up a house and gained a palace. I'd traded the familiar disappointment of family obligation for the uncertain promise of chosen relationships. Tuesday's coffee meeting would determine whether those trades were permanent or if there was still hope for rebuilding what had been broken. But regardless of Daniel's ability to change, I knew that I would never again accept being treated as anything less than the remarkable woman I'd always been. The harbor lights twinkled outside my bedroom windows as I drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, I would face it from a position of strength rather than supplication. At 72, I was finally living life on my own terms, and that felt like the greatest victory of all. Tuesday morning arrived with a gentle rain that transformed the harbor into a impressionist painting of gray and silver. I dressed carefully for my coffee meeting with Daniel, choosing a navy blue dress that struck the right balance between elegant and approachable. The woman looking back at me from the mirror was someone I barely recognized, confident, well-groomed, radiating the kind of quiet authority that comes from finally knowing your own worth. Harborview Cafe occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse, its exposed brick walls and industrial light fixtures creating an atmosphere that was both trendy and comfortable. I arrived 10 minutes early, selecting a corner table where I could see the entrance, while maintaining some privacy for what promised to be an emotionally charged conversation. Daniel appeared in the doorway exactly at 10, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. The man who approached my table looked older than his 48 years, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping well, and the nervous energy radiating from him was palpable even from across the room. "Mom," he said as he reached my table, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down, Daniel. You said you wanted to apologize properly. I'm here to listen." He settled into his chair with the careful movements of someone who wasn't sure of his welcome. When the waitress approached, he ordered black coffee with shaking hands, while I sipped the lavender latte I'd already been enjoying. "I don't know where to start," he began, staring down at his hands. "There's so much I need to say, so much I need to explain." "Start with the truth," I suggested. "Not the version that makes you look better, but the actual truth about what happened and why." Daniel took a deep breath, and when he looked up, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Genuine vulnerability mixed with what appeared to be honest remorse. "The truth is that I became someone I don't recognize. Somewhere along the way, I started believing that success meant leaving behind everything that reminded me of where I came from. You represented a part of my past that I was ashamed of, and instead of being grateful for the sacrifices that made my success possible, I decided you were an obstacle to the image I wanted to project." It was a more honest assessment than I'd expected, and I found myself leaning forward slightly, curious to hear more. "When I married Veronica, she didn't just criticize you. She criticized the part of me that came from you. The part that valued hard work over appearances, substance over style. Instead of defending those values, I let her convince me that they were somehow inferior. I was so desperate to fit into her world that I was willing to sacrifice everything that made me who I really was." The waitress brought his coffee, and Daniel wrapped his hands around the mug as if seeking warmth. "I told myself that asking you to move out was practical, that it was what mature adults do when they get married. But the truth is, I was embarrassed by you. Not because of anything you did wrong, but because your presence reminded me of truths about myself that I wasn't ready to face." His words hung in the air between us, and I studied his face carefully. There was something different about his demeanor, a humility I hadn't seen since he was a child confessing to breaking a neighbor's window with a poorly aimed baseball. "Go on," I said quietly. "The worst part is that I convinced myself I was protecting you by not including you in our social activities. I told myself that you wouldn't enjoy dinner parties with my colleagues or company events with Veronica's friends. But the real reason was that I was afraid they would judge me for having a mother who worked with her hands, instead of having an advanced degree." Daniel's voice cracked slightly, and I saw tears beginning to form in his eyes. I was so focused on what other people might think that I completely lost sight of what actually mattered. I had a mother who built a successful business from nothing, who raised me alone after Dad left, who worked 3 jobs to pay for my education. Instead of being proud of that incredible woman, I treated her like a burden to be managed. The cafe had grown busier during our conversation, the morning rush filling tables around us with the comfortable murmur of casual conversation. But our corner felt isolated, suspended in the gravity of words that couldn't be taken back. "When you revealed that you had money, my first reaction wasn't admiration for your financial acumen or pride in your success. It was panic because I realized I'd completely misjudged the situation. I'd been treating you like you needed my support when the reality was that you'd been quietly subsidizing my lifestyle for months. How long have you known about my business? I asked, curious about when the full scope of his ignorance had become clear to him. I didn't know anything until after you sold the house. I spent hours researching Holloway construction, reading articles about your projects, looking at the commercial properties you own. Mom, you're not just successful, you're a powerhouse in this industry. And I never bothered to ask about any of it. He pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot of an article from the local business journal. The headline read, "Local Construction Pioneer Celebrates 30 Years of Excellence." And the accompanying photo showed me accepting an award for outstanding achievement in sustainable building practices. This article is from last year. You were recognized as one of the top small business owners in the state, and I had no idea. I was so busy being embarrassed by what I thought you were that I never took the time to learn who you actually are. I remembered that awards ceremony, how I'd hoped Daniel might attend if I mentioned it. But he'd been busy that weekend, something about a couple's retreat with Veronica, and I hadn't pushed the issue. It hadn't occurred to me that he would have been proud rather than embarrassed if he'd understood what the recognition meant. What about Veronica? I asked. Where does she stand in all of this newfound clarity? Daniel's expression darkened, and he looked away toward the rain-streaked windows. Veronica and I are separated. She moved back in with her parents 2 days ago. The announcement surprised me, though I tried not to show it. What happened? She couldn't handle the reality of my actual situation. When we were living in your house, surrounded by the lifestyle your generosity provided, she could maintain the illusion that she'd married someone with real financial security. But when we ended up in a hotel room with maxed-out credit cards and no prospects for stable housing, the fantasy crumbled pretty quickly. I'm sorry, I said, and found that I meant it despite everything Veronica had put me through. Don't be. The separation forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about the kind of man I'd become. I married Veronica because she represented the life I thought I wanted. Sophisticated, glamorous, uncomplicated by the messiness of real history. But when things got difficult, she disappeared. Rebecca, on the other hand, stood by me through unemployment, financial stress, and all the challenges of raising children. And I threw that away for someone who couldn't even stick around when the going got tough. Daniel paused to take a sip of his coffee, and I used the moment to process what I was hearing. This level of self-reflection was new for him, and I found myself cautiously optimistic that he might actually have learned something from this experience. I've been staying with my friend Mike from college. He's been brutally honest about what an idiot I've been. He reminded me of stories I'd apparently told him years ago about growing up with this amazing single mother who could fix anything and was building a business empire while raising a kid. He said he'd always wanted to meet you, and he couldn't understand why I never brought you around. And what did you tell him? The truth, that I'd become ashamed of the best person in my life because I was too insecure to appreciate what real strength and character look like. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of his confession settling between us. Outside, the rain had intensified, creating a cocoon of privacy around our conversation. Daniel, I said finally, I appreciate your honesty, and I believe that you've gained some important insights from this experience. But I need you to understand something. You didn't just hurt my feelings or damage my pride. You made fundamental choices about who deserved your loyalty and respect, and those choices revealed something about your character that can't be undone with an apology. He nodded, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. I know I've probably lost you forever, and I accept that it's my own fault. But I had to try to explain, to make sure you knew that my behavior had nothing to do with your worth as a person, and everything to do with my own insecurities and failings. What do you want from me, Daniel? What does redemption look like in your mind? The question seemed to catch him off guard, and he struggled to formulate an answer. I don't know if redemption is even possible. I just want the chance to be the son you deserved all along. I want to learn about your business, to understand the woman who raised me, to be someone you can be proud of instead of someone you have to tolerate. And if I'm not interested in giving you that chance? If the damage is too severe to repair? More silence as he contemplated a future without his mother's presence in his life. Then I'll have to live with the consequences of my choices. But I hope, I'm hoping that the woman who taught me about second chances might consider giving me one more opportunity to prove I can be better. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated emotional appeal. But what I saw was genuine anguish, mixed with a fragile hope that suggested his words might actually reflect a meaningful change in perspective. Daniel, if we were to rebuild our relationship, it would have to be completely different from what we had before. I won't accept being taken for granted, dismissed, or treated as an obligation. I won't pretend that your wife's behavior was acceptable, and I won't minimize the impact of your choices on my life. I understand. Whatever terms you set, I'll accept them. I'm not finished. Any relationship we have going forward will be contingent on your relationship with your children. I've watched you prioritize romantic relationships over parental responsibilities, and I won't be complicit in that pattern continuing. Lily and Marcus need their father to be present, engaged, and reliable. If you can't commit to being the parent they deserve, then we have nothing to discuss. Daniel straightened in his chair, and for the first time since he'd arrived, I saw a flash of the determined young man I'd raised. I want to be a better father. I want to be someone they can depend on instead of someone who disappoints them when it's convenient. Words are easy, Daniel. Actions are what matter. If you're serious about changing, then show me. Show the children. Show Rebecca that you understand what you put them through, and that you're committed to doing better. How do I do that? How do I prove that this change is real? I considered the question carefully, thinking about what would constitute meaningful evidence of genuine transformation. Start by taking responsibility for your children's emotional well-being. They've been through a traumatic divorce, followed by watching their father choose a new wife over their grandmother. They need therapy, stability, and consistent proof that they matter to you. I can do that. I will do that. Second, rebuild your relationship with Rebecca as co-parents. You owe her an apology for the way you treated her during and after the divorce. She's been raising your children, essentially as a single mother, while you played house with someone who wanted to pretend they didn't exist. Daniel winced at the accurate assessment, but he nodded. You're right. Rebecca deserves better from me. Finally, if you want a relationship with me, you'll need to earn it by demonstrating genuine interest in who I am as a person rather than what I can do for you. Learn about my business, my interests, my life outside of being your mother. Treat me like someone whose thoughts and experiences have value beyond their utility to you. I want to do all of that. I want to know the woman who built Holloway Construction, who raised me alone, who somehow managed to accumulate millions of dollars while I thought she was struggling financially. I want to understand how I could have been so blind to the remarkable person who was right in front of me. The sincerity in his voice was compelling, but I'd learned to be cautious about accepting promises from people who had disappointed me. Daniel, I'm willing to give you one chance to prove that you mean what you're saying. But this isn't a negotiation, and there won't be multiple opportunities to get it right. If you revert to your old patterns, if you prioritize your convenience over your commitments, if you treat this like a temporary inconvenience rather than a fundamental change in how you approach relationships, then we're done permanently. I understand. What do you need from me to start rebuilding? I pulled out my phone and showed him the calendar app I'd been using to plan my European vacation. I'm leaving for a month-long trip to Europe in 2 weeks. While I'm gone, I want you to focus on your children and your relationship with Rebecca. Get Lily and Marcus into counseling, establish a regular visitation schedule that actually works for their needs, and have an honest conversation with Rebecca about how you can be a better co-parent. Daniel nodded eagerly. And when you get back? When I get back, if you've done the work I've outlined, we'll have dinner. Just the two of us. At a restaurant of my choosing, where you can tell me about what you've learned about yourself and your priorities. If that goes well, we'll take it one step at a time. What about Lily and Marcus? Can I tell them we talked? The question revealed something hopeful about his mindset. He was thinking about his children's emotional needs rather than just his own desire for reconciliation. You can tell them that we had a good conversation and that we're working on rebuilding our relationship. But Daniel, don't make them promises you can't keep. They've been disappointed enough. I won't. I swear I won't hurt them again. We finished our coffee in more comfortable silence, the immediate tension of our confrontation replaced by something that felt cautiously optimistic. As we prepared to leave, Daniel reached across the table and gently touched my hand. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. When you sold the house to Rebecca, was it just about punishing me, or was there something more to it? I considered the question carefully, thinking about the complex motivations that had driven my decision. It was about justice, not punishment. Rebecca and the children needed stability and security. You needed to understand that your actions have consequences. And I needed to demonstrate that I wouldn't accept being treated as disposable. But it wasn't just revenge. Daniel, if I'd wanted revenge, I would have sold the house to strangers and left you to figure out where your children would live. Instead, I made sure they ended up in a home with someone who loves them and will prioritize their well-being. Even when I was angry with you, I was still thinking about what was best for Lily and Marcus. Tears filled his eyes again. I don't deserve that kind of grace. Maybe not, but your children do, and they deserve a father who understands the difference between selfish choices and loving sacrifice. As we stood to leave, Daniel hesitated by the table. Mom, can I hug you? The request surprised me with its tentative vulnerability. For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to run to me for comfort when he skinned his knee or had a bad dream. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the hurt and disappointment, he was still my child. I opened my arms, and he embraced me with the desperate gratitude of someone who had been drowning and suddenly felt solid ground beneath his feet. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time and proof of genuine change. But it was hope, and for now, that was enough. Over the following 2 weeks, as I prepared for my European adventure, I watched Daniel's efforts to rebuild his relationships with careful attention. He enrolled Lily and Marcus in family counseling and began attending regular sessions himself. He had what Rebecca described as a long overdue, honest conversation about their co-parenting arrangement, including a formal apology for his behavior during the divorce. Most importantly, he started showing up consistently for his children's lives. School events, soccer games, homework help, all the routine responsibilities he'd been delegating to others while he focused on his romantic relationships. The children were cautiously optimistic about their father's renewed attention, though they were clearly waiting to see if his efforts would be sustained. Rebecca called me 3 days before my departure with an update that brought tears to my eyes. Patricia, I wanted you to know that Daniel asked me to help him plan a special surprise for you before you leave. He's been working with the children to create something he calls a memory book of all the sacrifices you made for him growing up. Lily has been interviewing neighbors and family friends about their memories of you, and Marcus has been scanning old photos and school reports. That sounds lovely, I said, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. But that's not the best part. He's also been researching your business achievements and wants to nominate you for the state's Entrepreneur of the Year award. He said he should have been celebrating your success all along instead of ignoring it. The news left me speechless for a moment. The idea that Daniel was finally taking pride in my accomplishments rather than being embarrassed by them represented exactly the kind of fundamental shift I'd hoped to see. How are the children handling all these changes? I asked. Better than I expected. They're cautious, but they're starting to believe that this version of their father might stick around. Yesterday, Lily told me she was proud of how brave you'd been to start a new life. She said she wants to be like you when she grows up, strong enough to demand respect instead of accepting whatever people are willing to give. The observation from my 15-year-old granddaughter encapsulated everything I'd been trying to model for my family. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's bad behavior, even when that someone is your own child. My last evening in the penthouse before leaving for Europe was spent packing and reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed in just 2 months. The woman who had been sleeping in a guest room and accepting whatever crumbs of affection her family was willing to offer had been replaced by someone who lived in a penthouse, traveled to exotic destinations, and demanded the respect she deserved. Daniel arrived at 7 with Lily and Marcus, carrying the memory book they'd created. As we sat in my elegant living room with the harbor lights twinkling outside the windows, they presented me with a leather-bound album that chronicled my life from my son's perspective. There were photos I'd forgotten existed. Me teaching Daniel to ride a bike, helping him with science fair projects, cheering from the bleachers at his high school graduation. But more moving were the written memories from people who had witnessed my sacrifices over the years. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door had written about watching me leave for work at 5 in the morning and return at midnight, only to get up early the next day to help Daniel with homework. Daniel's third grade teacher had contributed a note about how I'd volunteered to help with the school's construction projects, donating both my time and expertise to improve the children's learning environment. But it was Daniel's own contribution that affected me most deeply. He'd written a letter acknowledging every sacrifice I'd made, every opportunity I'd given him, every moment when I'd put his needs before my own comfort. More importantly, he'd written about the woman he was finally learning to see. Not just his mother, but Patricia Holloway, the entrepreneur, the innovator, the woman who had built something remarkable while raising a child alone. "I spent so many years taking you for granted," he said as I finished reading his letter. "I thought being a good son meant achieving success and making you proud of my accomplishments. I never understood that I should have been proud of yours." Lily and Marcus had written their own sections, describing memories of their grandmother that had nothing to do with money or status, and everything to do with love, attention, and genuine interest in their lives. They remembered cooking lessons, bedtime stories, and the way I'd listened to their problems with the seriousness of someone who truly valued their thoughts and feelings. As I closed the memory book, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with understanding. My family finally saw me clearly, not as an obligation or an embarrassment, but as a person worthy of respect and appreciation. "Thank you," I said simply. "This is the most meaningful gift I've ever received." "We love you, Grandma Patricia," Lily said, settling beside me on the sofa. "Have the most amazing trip, and take lots of pictures to show us when you get back." "I love you too, sweetheart. All of you." As Daniel prepared to leave with the children, he lingered in my foyer for a private moment. "Mom, I know I have a lot of work left to do to earn your trust back. But I want you to know that regardless of what happens between us, this experience has changed me permanently. I understand now what I lost when I chose appearances over authenticity, convenience over loyalty. I won't make those mistakes again." "I believe you," I said, and realized that I actually did. "Daniel, I'm proud of the work you're doing to become a better father and a better man. That's all I ever really wanted. For you to be someone worthy of the sacrifices that made your opportunities possible." The next morning, as my taxi pulled up to take me to the airport, I took one last look at the penthouse that had become my sanctuary. In 2 months, I'd gone from being an unwanted guest in my own home to being the mistress of a palace that reflected my true worth and accomplishments. But more importantly, I'd rediscovered my own strength and refused to accept being treated as anything less than the remarkable woman I'd always been. The scared, desperate mother who had accepted whatever crumbs of affection her family was willing to offer had been replaced by someone who demanded genuine respect and appreciation. As the plane lifted off toward my European adventure, I smiled at the thought of all the experiences waiting for me. Museums in Paris, historical sites in Rome, galleries in Barcelona. All the cultural treasures I'd dreamed of seeing but never allowed myself to pursue. At 72, I was finally living the life I'd always deserved. Whether Daniel would be part of that life remained to be seen, but either way, I was no longer willing to settle for less than I was worth. The flight attendant offered me champagne as we reached cruising altitude, and I accepted it with the confidence of someone who had finally learned that she deserved to celebrate herself. Through the airplane window, I could see the city growing smaller below me, and with it, all the limitations I'd once accepted as inevitable. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. "The kids are already asking when you're coming back. Daniel seems committed to proving himself worthy of your trust. Safe travels and enjoy every moment of your well-deserved adventure." I turned off the phone and settled back in my first-class seat, surrounded by luxury that I'd finally allowed myself to enjoy. For the first time in my life, I was traveling not as someone's mother or grandmother or supporter, but simply as Patricia Holloway, a woman with her own dreams, her own money, and her own magnificent future stretching out before her like an endless horizon of possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.